welcome back to another episode of Chatterbox with me, Mel Biggs. This is the podcast where I get to sit down every month and talk to a folk musician from across UK and Europe about their artistry, the person behind the music, and get to geek out a little bit about folk music education. This month, my guest is Jon Spiers. He is the original inspiration for the fact that I started playing these instruments that you can see on the shelf behind me, and I am so stoked that I got to spend almost 2 hours in a chat with him on Zoom. We managed to find some time in his incredibly busy schedule. This has actually been filmed back in September 2024, just before he was heading out on his autumn tour with various different lineups. We get to chatting about how Spiers and Bowden found each other, and also how Peter Knight and Jon Spiers formed the Gigspanner Big Band, and how that has just gone from strength to strength. And there's even half an hour extra on the extended podcast if you want to know everything there is to know about Bellowhead. I really hope you enjoy this episode. It was so fun to make and go back over in the edit. I am so excited to share it with you. So without further ado, here is Jon Spiers. Jon, I'm so excited to have you on. I'm really pleased that we managed to find a time to make it work, because we've had to do this earlier than it's going to go out. You've just finished a really busy summer and you're about to start a really busy autumn winter. How has your summer been so far?
It's been busy, but in an unusual way, because I haven't been super busy with festivals and things like that, sort of a few here and there every other weekend. But what I have been really busy with is trying to get new music together with several projects. So in June I recorded a Christmas album with Jackie Oates, because you always have to do that in the middle of summer. That's just how the timeline works. If you're doing anything Christmassy, it's going to be blazing hot when you're recording it, and you'll feel the least seasonal ever.
Do you have to get the box of tinsel out to kind of actually make yourself feel?
It's tricky. It's just a mindset thing, really. But I mean, playing carols does get you in the mood, and then you go out of the studio back into the brightness at sort of 8 o'clock at night and think, this is what it's
weird.
like. Yeah, the later half of the summer I've been in pretty extensive rehearsals with the Gigspanner Big Band, working on our next album. That was pretty much every week in between the festivals in August, and we started putting the material together in April, so it's a very long ongoing process, because in that band we basically, all the arrangements that there are and grooves and things that we play together are entirely jammed together as a six-piece, so that takes time. It's worth it, but it takes a lot of time, because you'll quite often work on something that isn't working for half a day, and then you'll only realise that at the end. But so it's quite an expensive process in terms of time, but it has some very amazing results, and you kind of know it when it happens. It's lovely. You suddenly get someone strikes up with something that you go, oh yeah, we could do that. And we're going to be recording that in October on our tour, so we're going to tour the new material and record it live, which is how we operate. That's how we operate with the Gigspanner Big Band. Ever since I've been there, the Saltlines show as well, we basically did the show live and recorded every one of the performances, and then get into the studio and do some jiggery pokery afterwards. And sometimes you'll get the first half of a tune set will be from one gig and the second half will be from another one, and it's quite interesting how you can do that.
That is really clever, considering it. I mean, are you working to a click? I'm assuming not.
No. I mean, we're fairly solid on tempos, but obviously there's a bit of creep here and there. There are some things you can do in the software that can mesh things together a bit better, but we generally try and find points where there's a very definite sort of change in the track.
So it's less obvious.
Like that. But it is interesting how recording those things live, you get a much better vibe than a studio recording, because you 100%. Are actually in the heat of a gig when you're recorded.
As we're in this moment talking about Gigspanner, can you tell us a little bit more about how the collaboration with Peter Knight came about and how you felt about that? I mean, fantastic fiddle player, Steeleye span, for those that don't know. I'm sure everyone does know, but just talk to us a little bit about how it came about and what it was like for you to take that role.
Yeah, well, we first worked together, I think, in 2016 at the Folk East Festival. I mean, I've met him a few times before, and back in the day I think me and Jon supported Steeleye Span when he was still in the band, and sort of we had a little jam together and played on one of their tracks, so he wasn't a complete stranger. But 2016 was a funny year, 2016 2017 for me, because Spiers and Bowden wasn't happening anymore, and Bellowhead had just finished, and it was kind of, okay, better do something then. And I was doing a few solo shows here and there, and in that first summer, a few very kind festivals took me on and let me sort of experiment with the solo show at them. One of those was Folk East. I've got my Folk East cup here.
Oh, fantastic. Bit of a plug. I love that festival. They are moving, aren't they, for 2020?
They are, yes. There are worries about the site being sold, and so they're moving to a new, apparently even better site next year. So
I'm looking forward to going, and if anyone's listening that hasn't been, I really recommend it. It's got a big festival feel on a kind of small scale. It's kind of one of these amazing, I don't know how they do it, but it just feels fantastic.
It's just really chilled out.
I think what I meant to say was a small festival feel on a big scale is actually what I meant to say. Is, it's got that real heart to it.
Yeah, I'd say it's more that way round, and I think they've been quite careful with choosing the next site as well. I haven't seen it, but I do trust the people who run that festival, because they make some very interesting decisions. Like, actually, it wasn't entirely their decision to put me and Peter together at that festival, but I did say, when I think, because I'd seen things that had happened at other festivals where they have collaborative projects between people at the festivals, and I was thinking, well, if I'm going to be doing anything ongoing in the near future after Bellowhead split up, I'm going to have to start working with musicians. It's quite, you can't really phone up people that you've never met or played with before and go, fancy playing some tunes?
Cold calling your next collaboration. It's kind
so
of
I sort of did it sneakily via asking people if they had these collaborative projects ongoing, and Becky came back from Folk East and said, no, we don't, but Peter Knight's here and he's just left Steeleye Span, so why don't you get together with him and do amazing. Something? And it was that vague. But Peter came round to my house when he was over from France a few weeks before, and we just played through some tune sets, played each other things that we were enjoying at the time, and that's how it started, really. We did the first gig in 2016, and I think the year after they did it again, because the gig itself, it was incredible, because we had no expectations of what it was going to be like. It was very improvised, which that turns out that's the core of what we do, really, is improvisation on the theme of traditional music. So that's what we did then. But the way it went down and the way it felt like it went on that first gig, we were sort of really chuffed with it. And so like typical musicians, we didn't do anything with the idea until Jon and Becky got us back at Folk East the next year. And after that one, which went well as well, I think we just went, we should probably do some more of this, eh? And so that's how that started. And a few years later, after we had been working, where we recorded an album that next year, the Well Met album, and in 2019 he asked if I'd join the Gigspanner Big Band with Phil and Hannah and the Gigspanner Trio.
Fabulous. I must admit, I'm yet to see you. It seems that I have tried several times when you've been on tour, and it's just never lined up when I'm free, which is really annoying. But I have heard amazing things from videos and recordings, but I just need to experience it live, and that seems like very much the energy and the ethos behind it. So this new album, I'm very excited to get out to a gig and see that.
Yeah, well, I mean, anyone who wants to come, I know I can't advertise it because it'll be in the past, but
anything in 2025?
Yeah, and we'll be doing gigs then as well. But but that's the thing with one of our gigs is, what you could be watching is actually the album.
I want to go back in time, if that's all right with you, right back to the year dot for you in terms of where you got into folk music. I know that your mum and dad, maybe just your dad, was into Morris. That was the strike of the match, shall we say. But tell us a little bit more about all of that history and how you started, up to the point of starting the Melodeon.
Yeah, well, Dad's a Morris dancer, and it wasn't a big thing in our house like it is in some houses. Some families go, right, we define ourselves by folk music, and it was nothing like that. It was like, in the summer, you knew you were going to be dragged off to a pub to sit in a pub garden while there was Morris dancing going on, and that was about it, really. We didn't really go to I don't think I ever went to a festival or anything beyond a local village fete or something like that. And I liked it. I've always been into music, so the music side of it was probably more interesting to me than the dancing when I was a kid. I've always learned music by ear because I'm an absolutely abysmal sight reader.
I didn't know that. And that's a nice little tidbit for people to know that you can reach the starry heights that you have without reading sheet music. That's great.
Well, I don't know if it's sort of mild dyslexia or something, but just the way that music is written down never really made much sense to my eyes and my brain, because it's just the same symbols. I mean, when you read a book, all the symbols are different and they mean something different, but the music ones are all the same. And all you have to is slight depth perception. And, if you're one of those people, when you look at loads of straight lines next to each other, you can't quite tell which one's which. I just never could get the hang of it. And I had piano lessons when I was little, and I used to cheat. I used to pretend I was reading the music, because that's clearly what everyone who teaches music wants you to do. It's more important than playing the instrument for them. And so I would find a way of hearing the tune some other way, and my ear got attuned to picking up tunes very early on. So then I could look at the sheet music and remember how it went. And I'd occasionally get one note wrong here or there, but it was enough to convince the music teacher that I was learning the proper way when I wasn't. And so when I went out to these Morris do's, I think I used to get quite bored. And at one point I started bringing a recorder along and just joining in, just in the background. And then I think quite late on in that process, they sort of noticed me doing it and said, "Oh, come and play for the Morris on your recorder." And I'd get my little recorder out and play along with the accordion players. But then I stopped going when I got old enough to stay at home. They were doing it, and I didn't, and I just wanted to watch telly or play football or something. So it sort of stopped there, and that was maybe aged 13 or something like that. Yeah, saw it a little bit after that, but I didn't do anything with folk music then. I suppose I tried to bring a little bit when I did GCSE music. I think I wrote one of the pieces I wrote was sort of in the folk style, and that was actually encouraged by the GCSE syllabus itself. And I'm sort of going, "Oh, I know about this. This is something that's like that stuff." And I played it on the mandolin that Dad brought me back from Russia. I think it was a really cheap Russian mandolin, and I tuned it wrong, like the top four strings of a guitar, because I mucked about with guitars as well at that point. And yeah, so that was my early into it. I think we had, what were the other things we had? Well, you're probably too young to remember the idea of travelling in the car and all having to listen to the same music and only having one tape.
No, I do. I very much remember we had
for the entire holiday.
Shania Twain was a big holiday travelling cassette for us. And
well, John Kirkpatrick was one of those for me. There was an album, quite scary folk rock album called Mr. Fox that they had one summer. And then it was the Beach Boys. So it was so some of it must have gone in that way. But I didn't start playing the squeeze box until the Melodeon until my second year of university, when I was presumably 19.
Yeah,
20,
1920.
It wasn't 1920.
19/20. That's very much akin to my own journey, which I don't know if you know this. I don't know if I've told you before, but yeah, I didn't do very much in my first year or second year, maybe even third year, because the Melodeon was the spare Morris box that I picked up when I moved to Cardiff for my degree. I just thrived playing that. It kept me sane in amongst everything. Just pausing here to say, I think you're another one of the Melodeon Scientists Club, aren't you? There's quite a few of us now, as I've collected on this podcast.
Yeah, I'm not particularly scientific anymore in terms of how I approach things, but my degree was in a sciences degree, so yeah, it's a natural sciences degree from Cambridge.
Which is quite the accolade, I have to say, like going to Cambridge
I
to
don't
study.
think my tutors would agree. I think they think he probably made a mistake letting me in, but I was one of those people who at school was really sort of at the top end of their class in terms of academic achievement, and the great level of going suddenly to a place where everyone is that, like Cambridge, especially on that sciences degree, with all the massive influx, the disparity of people who are there from private schools and have had tuition and blah blah blah. Suddenly I was very near the bottom of the pile amongst my peers, and that's quite a thing to get your head around suddenly.
Yeah.
From if you've been sort of found everything pretty easy, just everyone says, oh, you've done really great, and you haven't you worked hard, but you didn't work. It wasn't
hard,
sort of
yeah.
like so hard that you'd given up the rest of your life. And suddenly I came to this strange realization that if I want to even get a 2-1 here, I'm going to have to give up everything and just absolutely hammer this subject, or I could get a Melodeon. And I think that second year was when I kind of relaxed and went, I'm going to get through this, but I don't think I'm going to get through this at the top end. And it was becoming increasingly clear to me throughout doing the degree that I didn't want to be a research scientist, because, I'm very interested in the subjects that science has discovered, but the process of discovering more is really, really tedious.
And also very different to learning about the subject. It's
yeah,
about
yeah.
getting funding and everything, managing a team of PhD students.
It's
everything.
A totally different game.
Yeah.
And so when doing my research project in the third year, I just went, I don't want any of this. I don't want to do this for a job. What do I do? I've just wasted 3 years doing this. After university was probably when I learnt properly how to play and discovered the folk scene, because I was literally just playing. Well, I started off with a piano accordion. Actually, in my first year I bought a piano accordion because I used to play the piano. In the second year I'd been to the folk club a few times because I didn't really, I knew there was this folk music. I could play these Morris tunes that were just in my head. I had a tape of Sharon Shannon and didn't understand why I couldn't play any of the tunes. Someone at the folk club said, well, all the stuff that you like, all that bouncy music that you like, it's not done on that, it's done on a Melodeon. Bought the squeeze box and spent the first couple of weeks just going, I can't do it, it keeps changing note, I can't do it. And I got really, really frustrated, put it on top of my wardrobe, forgot about it for ages, went back to playing the accordion, and then when the screw really turned towards the exams for that year, I think it was the one thing that I kept going back to. And I thought, I'd gone to the music shop and they had a copy of Dave Mallinson's Morris How to Play the Melodeon book. It's actually incredibly methodical. And I thought, well, okay, I've ignored it, any real methodology. I'm just going to go through the first few tunes and do exactly what he says. And I knew the tunes anyway, so I knew what I was aiming for. And it was literally put this finger here, press, and then put this finger there and pull, and then the left hand, you have to do that at the same time. And it was totally by rote. And I think by the third one, which was learning my first tune in D, and I realised it was different in D, because when you wanted a G chord, you had to push instead of pull. Yeah. And it was like, there's patterns here, and the patterns started going in my head. And I think by that third one, which was Laudanum Bunches, something in my head clicked. I went, but then when you're pulling those ones, that's also an A chord on the right hand, and that's where your fingers want to be, and it's a triangle, and that, and it all went, and yeah. I the next tune, I just went, okay, I can do this myself now. I don't need the book. I can work out where all the things are. That's when it clicked. So it was quite a long time after buying the instrument, but it was after properly actually sitting down and making friends with it that I got the bug. That's
really interesting to hear. My journey was a little bit more, I don't know, it did come to me more naturally, but I can remember I first saw you play with Jon Boden in 2001. I think you were still quite wet behind the ears. You hadn't been together very long, and I remember seeing these two kind of young people on the folk scene, and I was like, what? Because myself, I hadn't grown up with a particularly folky family. My dad started the local Morris side. He was one of the founder members, and that became a bit like yourself. It was something we did, but it wasn't our whole life. We did a lot of other stuff as well, but so I wasn't aware of, the folk legends of yore kind of thing. The 60s and 70s folk scene wasn't part of our generation. I didn't grow up with that music, so you guys were the first people that I saw, and it really kind of made me whip my head around and go, oh, there's young people that do this stuff, and look at that funny instrument that man's playing. And it really took my interest. I think from my Morris side, we didn't have Melodians, we just had piano accordions. And I remember 2001, I watched you and I was like, great, bought the albums, obsessed about them. And it wasn't until 18, as I say, that I got a Melodeon, and then learnt it pretty effectively within a few months, I would say. Like, you know, the basics of getting both hands go together. But that was at the expense of coursework and various other things that I just didn't do.
Someone's got to
go. But yeah, it had its own logic, and it seems that everyone has their own journey to finding that logic. And, you know, yes, sometimes that means putting it down and walking away for a while and then coming back with a different headspace and a guide. I mean, the Mali book is just legendary, isn't it? It's helped so many people. So you started playing, you got into it in your second year of your degree. Did you graduate? Did you get a degree? And
yeah,
you passed.
I got a degree.
Yeah.
It's 2-2.
I think mine was a 2-2 as well. I was very surprised, so maybe we're in the same.
Yeah, I mean, I had worries that it would be below that in some way, either for the good or bad. But
and you'd got into the session scene in Cambridge by this point as well?
No, I'd not started playing sessions. I'd experienced 1 or 2 sessions randomly, including, I think Martin Green lived there at the time, and he was kind of playing crazy late night Irish sessions, and I bumped into him a few times at that point. But no, it wasn't until I went back to Oxford with sort of my tail between my legs and not quite knowing what came next. So I started off that first summer properly looking for jobs and careers advice and things like that, and I kind of tentatively wanted to go into biodiversity thing, all the things that you can do with a science degree that jobs are badly paid and difficult to come by, and you have to do tons of voluntary work in order to even start to get into them. That side of thing was most interesting to me. I spent a very bizarre 3 days as apprentice head brewer to a brewery in Plymouth, and even I could see that brewery was doomed to a dreadful fate and didn't want to stay on in that lifestyle. And I discovered, I went busking. That was the first thing I did. I went busking in Oxford and in the towns around Oxford. That year I got back, and I would do that every day. And I don't want to sound awful for people who are at university these days, but we only had the student loan was sort of like a bonus. It didn't have to pay for our tuition fees, and it was only £1,000 a year. And I'd taken a couple of those, and I paid it all back off through busking in that first couple of years.
Wow.
While I was still living at my parents' house. I ended up working in pubs in Oxford because the winter was coming and it was getting very difficult to busk. And
frozen fingers.
Fewer tourists, bad weather, mixture of all those things. But the landlord of the pub that I'd gone into to have lunch said to me, "Oi, don't fill in that that unemployment benefit form. Come and work at my pub because you'll get more than that and you'll have a laugh as well." And it was true. I had a great couple of years working part-time at the Turf Tavern, which is a famous pub in Oxford, not a music pub but a lovely pub. And then in the evenings I wasn't doing that. I would be down at all the sessions in Oxford at the Fir Tree, the Elm Tree, the Half Moon, wherever the music went we followed. And then I moved out into a house in East Oxford where within probably 5 minutes walk of my house I could go to a session of some sort every night.
That's amazing.
Apart from maybe Thursday. And some of them weren't folk sessions. Some of them were jazz sessions. Some of them were open mic nights. But there was a really healthy music scene in Oxford, and the folk was a big part of that. And the sessions, that's where they liked what I did there. They were sort of like, "Oh, come in and we'll teach you," and "Oh, well done for coming back," you know. But I was just amazed at these other people that played all these different styles, and I learned my first French tunes from a guy called Tim who used to play in the sessions, and it was like basically early Blows a Bella repertoire that I knew as Tim's tunes. There was another guy kind of my age who played the Melodeon called Ian Roberts. I think he's in Sheffield now.
Yeah.
And he had a Salterelle and I'd just got a Salterelle, and it was like, "Hey, look at our Salterelles," you know? And he introduced me to some really lovely tunes from the Bismarcks and stuff like that, because he was on the Cayley dancing side of things. And just sort of happened into it, and that's kind of the point that I started working for a music shop the music room opened a branch in Oxford, and they put my name forward as someone to ask if I wanted to do it, and it was the perfect job for me to sort of indulge my squeezebox nerdery at the same time as being able to sort of play, do some of the first early gigs that I did, mainly playing for Kaylee's. And it just went from there to meeting Jon Boden was a really sort of natural timeline of just doing more and more of the being enticed to people to pay to play music. I was in a band very briefly with, do you know a guy called Ewan McPherson?
I have heard that name, yeah.
He's the stringy bouzouki and guitar player. He's been in loads of bands. Basically, he got really fed up with me and Marguerite, who were in the band with him, and one day went, "Bye, I'm moving to Edinburgh. That I'm going to make my musical fortune." And we went, "Well, oh right, okay, thanks. We've only had one gig, you know," and we weren't getting very far, to be fair. And we were trying to do English stuff, and he went up there, and then the next time I knew, he's in like the Peat Bog Fairies or something like that. And,
yeah.
You know, he was in Malinky for a bit. He's worked as an agent up there as well. So he really ambitiously wanted to be a folk musician. So I was in that for a bit before I met Jon. And then Jon just turned up at a pub session on his way. I think he was doing something with one of the Shakespeare performances in Oxford, and he was living in London at the time, and he just popped in to our session.
Just walked in. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'd assumed he was living there, so I didn't know it was even more of a chance like meeting that he just walked in and that's it. You just jammed and chatted, I suppose. Had a couple of beers.
He stayed for the whole session, and he did what he was doing at the time was a mixture of starting crazy sort of upbeat, mainly Irish and some American fiddle tunes, but then randomly doing fiddle singing. I think he did the Prickle Eye Bush that first time he came to the session, just him on the fiddle, and he had loads of these ones, and we go, he's singing as well. That's really weird. You know, in Oxford we tended to have people the singers would sing and the people with guitars would sing, but not someone with a fiddle. That's really odd, and you wouldn't accompany it yourself. So when we were kind of blown away by that, and I think a couple of the people in the pub were going, you two should get together, you should do something. And I think both of us went, should we? And so anyway, we swapped phone numbers, and then nothing happened until Jon rang me about 6 months later and went, "Oh, it's me from that session. Do you fancy doing something? I reckon I can get a folk club gig at the Lewis Arms Folk Club in Lewis in Sussex." And I was like, "Yeah, well, what are we going to do then?" So he came round, and we just basically tried to do some stuff. I taught him English tunes that he'd never really got into before, and he coaxed me into how to approach accompanying songs, which we didn't really know how to do on the instruments at the time, but we kind of liked the idea of using them as riffs behind the song sung fairly straight.
You can really hear that in the early recordings of Spiers and Bowden, I think, particularly how you use the left hand of the Melodeon. You know, I didn't hear anyone else doing that. Probably because I only listened to you for quite a long time before I listened to anyone else.
Things like the Rambling Sailor, there's a riff that's on the left hand on the bass notes of the Melodeon, and that's literally because Jon played it on the fiddle and went, "Can you do this?" Dun, dun, da, 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 da. And I'm sort of going, "Yeah, but it sounded really weird on the right hand." And he said, "Why don't you try it on the left hand?" What? That sounds really difficult. But the trick with that is you don't do anything else at the same time, so it's quite easy. And suddenly, oh, that's quite funky, that's quite groovy, that's really weird accompaniment for something like that. And this is before I discovered how to make them basses sound really bassy on a PA. This was just in a room. So yeah, we did play on that a little bit, and we found other little ways of doing stuff and how to sort of put rudimentary arrangements together, and that's how we did the material for Through and Through. And we recorded that whole album pretty much in its entirety in Jon's dad's flat on an 8-track machine or something. It was a weird sort of halfway between a digital recorder and a tape recorder, and it was very clunky, but we managed to record And I think there were certain moments we listened back to it and going, this is good. I think this is quite good. Surprised, because neither of us had really recorded anything before, and it was a very organic learning curve. You had to remember that everyone else who came onto the folk scene at that time, pretty much, had been through a sort of official way into folk music, which was, you went to Folkworks and you went to the Newcastle degree course that was just starting, and there were sort of lots of these people coming out of these schemes, and we turned up fairly unannounced and nobody's heard of us or met us, and we didn't quite know what we were doing. So the early albums, people were saying that they're like punks. We weren't. We were just people who hadn't come at it from that
formal,
there wasn't really a formal way in, but there was an in crowd and an in way of doing things, and we didn't do it that way. It was very much, no, we wanted to be a bit shouty and a bit, not irreverent. We weren't trying to be irreverent with anything. We were just trying to make it, as exciting for us as the other music we were listening to, which wasn't folk music.
Well, I was going to say, John's background had he already got his degrees by this point? He did theatrical music and like really odd things, like for a folk musician to have in their.
Yeah, his main degree was in medieval English history or something like that. He just started doing a master's in something to do in composition. In London, just as I met him, I think he was doing that. So he was doing that for the first couple of years, because I think we met in 1999. Was that first meeting?
So when I saw you in 2001, it was still 2 years, or barely that. I can't remember exactly when I saw you, but that seems like a lot, to have got through and through recorded and to have really found each other musically, and you were sparking off him for ideas, and vice versa, I would imagine, with your influences, and that sounds like a really like a melting pot, basically, that just took flame and went ahead, and like you say, you just wanted to do your thing and in your way.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, in 2000, I think we did our first gigs were literally anywhere that we had any kind of any type of contact at a folk club, I suppose. So we played the old folk club that I had gone to in Cambridge. We played the Oxford Folk Club. We played the Lewis one, which is where his parents lived, and he'd grown up going to that. He'd gone to that folk club quite a lot. Maidenhead Folk Club, because we knew people that was close enough to Oxford to know people, and we did a couple of gigs at the Talking Heads in Southampton, which was kind of more of a folky rock pub. But we had some great times down there with various different things I've played in.
Did you know that you were different? You say you put together what you did because it's what made you both happy. It wasn't that you weren't trying to be irreverent. I think you said that. But did you know it was making waves? Could you see that from that early on? Not really, no. I think it was quite difficult to see through that initial thing of folk clubs of people going, they're young and they're doing what we do, and and they would support you anyway. That supportiveness is difficult to see through. And I think I've got a recording of the first gig we did at the Oxford Folk Club, like on a mini disc, and it wasn't that good. Some elements of what we could do were there, but it was everything was too fast and rushed, and lots of loose ends. No, I don't think we did. I think one of the things we tried to do was we refused to not play something because it had been done too much. There was this sort of feeling that we got from everyone that's like, oh, you can't do that one, that's been done, everyone does that one. And it's like, but we want to do it as well, it's probably been done by everyone because it's a good one. That's it. And so we did a bit of that sort of. I do remember some of the reviews would come back going, well, they're just playing 3 around 3, or they're just, who does that? What's next? Speed the Plough, Davy Knick-Knack, and we wanted to see what fun you could get out of a good sort of well-known tune, and what could you do to it that's different, or what stamp could you put on it. So we did want to sort of have a play with things, but. No, I don't think we realised we were that different with it, really, apart from that approach. And it was a surprise when we got the first reviews through, when everyone was sort of suggesting that
we were doing things, putting words on what we were doing, and we didn't really have that perspective.
When did you know that you were gaining traction? And obviously I heard that, or I read it online, that you'd started talking about Bellowhead just as a thing to pass the time while you were stuck in a traffic jam. But, that must have come at a point after, you've been getting the gigs, you've been getting this traction building up behind you, and then...
Yeah, I think probably it wasn't until the second album, Bellow, came out that we kind of realised we were onto something, and it had a bit more of a definition. So the year before we did Bellow, so in the summer of 2002, we got Sidmouth. It was the craziest Sidmouth I've ever done. I was there from the Wednesday before it started until a couple of days after it finished, working on the music stall, which was a huge music stall. It used to be in the Ham. The sheer number of squeeze boxes we bring to that was unbelievable. It was a big operation. And while working on that all day, every day, and camping, I also played 7 gigs with Jon over the whole festival at random different places, and I think we got one spot where we were allowed to support Brass Monkey at the Ham, which was really exciting.
Amazing.
That's the festival, I think, that made us realise, because we just started doing Prickle Eye Bush, and that had gone down really well, and that was new for that festival. And when we went to record it, we put all the stuff together, and that's the one where it felt like it started taking off, and we had a proper agent, and the agent was getting us gigs here, there and everywhere, and there was interest from the festivals. And when we did play the festivals, we, possibly a bit arrogantly, were looking at everything that was on the festivals and going, there's loads of really, really talented English homegrown acts playing here, but then when it comes to the headliner, it's always either a massively old folk rock band, or at that point it was a big Scottish or Irish dancey band, the really big produced stuff. And it was like, but this is almost like a different kind of music. You've been listening to this stuff all night, and then suddenly you've got this, which is like a rave. Why can't we do that? If we did our gig and you turned us up, I reckon we could get that reaction out of people. But obviously we were just a duo, and we had by that point worked out from random chances that we needed a stomp box.
I was going to say, when did the stomp box enter the arena? Because that was a thing I can remember.
There was one gig we did at Sidmouth where we had an accidental stomp box, because we did used to both kick our feet about all over the place, and there was one panel on that Sidmouth Ham stage when we were doing the support for Brass Monkey that Jon was standing on, and it just went up the mic stand, and the mic picked up a noise and it was like, the noise is part of the gig, that's really good. And so we went, we should try and do something properly like that. And then we saw Rory McLeod and went up and asked him what on earth he was stamping on, and he said, it's just a piece of wood with this microphone underneath it. And so we found out what the microphone was, almost had a heart attack at the price of them, and then saved up and Jon built his first stomp box then. And we were starting to experiment with, turning the left hand up, miking the left hand different ways, and trying to make that more of a feature than it probably is if you hear it acoustically, because we were playing most of our gigs at that point through PAs.
Your left hand really drew me in from like when I first started, and I can remember studying pieces that were far beyond my ability. But if you don't work on something hard at the beginning levels, I don't think that you get there as quickly as if you hadn't bothered. And I can remember it was always like the left hand runs, and listening to it on the album was very different to when I was at the gig and when I was young enough to be up the front in the mosh pit and everything, and kind of just experiencing that bass through my whole body was just from a essentially acoustic duo that had been mic'd and EQ'd in a very particular way just to give this incredible rave effect from a fiddle and a melodeon. I mean, it was happy memories.
It's not, it's not true to how you hear the instruments, but that's not how we're playing anyway when we're on a big stage. So
you have the freedom to do that, don't you? And, particularly for festivals, it's not necessarily how you'd want to do a folk club gig, but festivals.
Well, it's how we want to do a folk club gig. Whether it's what they want is a different matter.
So how did you go then from there? I mean, where did all the names and the people come from that made the first iteration of Bellowhead?
So the car traffic jam thing you mentioned is sort of, it's a nice thing for people to say, oh, it started in a traffic jam. We've played on that a bit in the past. What actually happened was Tim Healy, who is the son of Dennis Healy, the famous politician, he is a top bloke and he put on gigs in Oxford, and I think we were doing something for the local Oxford television channel, which was dreadful. But he was there and we were there talking about folk, and he was just sort of saying, look, I'm going to start a folk festival. I'm going to start the Oxford Folk Festival. We haven't got one here. And we were, yeah, that's brilliant. And he said, now, what I really want is an amazing English festival headliner. I can't think of anyone that does the kind of trad music we like that can finish this festival off. And we said, we'll do it. And he said, but yes, it needs to be a big band. We'll get a big band. It'll be really big.
Sold.
So he went, it's a deal. If you can put on a gig, I'll give you £1,000 to pay for all the musicians. And so we went, okay, let's say yes, and then we'll work out what to do later. And I think it was a couple of days later we were in the traffic jam going, shit, how are we going to do this?
Sorry to interrupt the conversation, but if you want to hear Jon talk a lot more, like half an hour more about Bellowhead, the pros and the cons, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything to do with being part of a massive conglomerate beast like Bellowhead, then get yourself over to the extended podcast, which you can download. You can find it on my Patreon. You can subscribe for £4.50 plus a bit of VAT, and you can stay for as long as you like. You can quit whenever. There's no contract, but it will also unlock all of the extended podcasts from Series 1. There's a link in the description of this podcast, so check out my Patreon for extended podcasts plus Melinar tutorials from myself and all my guest tutors, sheet music downloads, there's all sorts of stuff, so get yourself over there and choose your tier. Thank you to everybody who supports my work on Patreon. I honestly couldn't do any of this without you, and I super appreciate every single member who is on there. Nearly 250 members now. That's quite a lot, and I am staggered that so many people want to follow me on there and support my work, so thank you. Now back to the interview. One of the things that I've realised over this, literally been this year, is the ageing process, and this wonderful thing in folk music that we look up the generational ladder when we are youngsters, and that's the only direction we can look. But I have this year just started looking downwards and seeing all these gorgeous young people, your kids, Jon's kids, the Melrose Quartet kids that are now a band in themselves. It's like the Melrose Juniors. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I remember when these kids were born, and it's really exciting, but there is that sort of recognition of, okay, I am not the youngest generation anymore. And I'm wondering how that feels for you as, your family are kind of learning and taking hold in their own life now, and what it's like to kind of see your friends' kids, kind of like Jackie Oates, for instance, and the Bridge and Bowden duo. How does that feel to sort of see this happening and supporting that along the way?
Well, yeah, it's great. I mean, I think I spent sort of the majority of my career turning around to people and going, why are you saying I'm young? when I was still being called young as a folk musician when most footballers would have had to have retired through injury. It's ridiculous how that label gets put on people for too long. And I want to be established. That's what I want, because there's a future in it. It means I'm not going to have to go and get a proper job. And watching the kids obviously is great. My kids, I've got one off to Arts Foundation College, and the other is doing sixth form and plays fiddle, and lovely. Yeah, it's how it should be. And I think the thing is, other people's kids always seem to grow up really quickly because you don't think about them for ages, but when you've got your own, they just get a little bit bigger every day and you don't notice.
Yeah. And suddenly they're graduating and they're off to university, and you think, oh, okay. So are your children, are they involved very much in the folk scene, or is it very much they dip in and out as they like? Do they go to festivals? Are they involved in Morris or anything?
Yeah, they come to stuff. They don't do Morris, but they love Folk East. They always go to Folk East with us. But they're kind of getting to that age, like I was with the Morris dancing, to go, no, I don't think I'll come out to this one. And so they've been to everything, but they can sort of now decide not to. So that's up to them. I don't want to push. I got into folk music not because it was forced on me. It was something that I could take or leave. And I think occasionally seen where it ends up when you go on, do the thing that I like, to your kids is not necessarily healthy.
No.
So we've always just dangled instruments around the house, and you can have a go on anything, don't worry, there's a piano there.
Do either of them play the squeeze box or the concertina or anything? I mean, you have so many lying
Robin's
around.
had to go on the concertina, and he can pick a tune out of that really well. He hasn't been obsessively playing it, so potentially not.
Yeah. What's it like for yourself? I'm thinking of a few tunes of yours, of which you have written many, but there are a few that have, in my opinion, become traditional on the scene. They are played in sessions up and down the country. Jiggery pokework, possibly, until the I'm not gonna say it, but the bleep the Tories, let's call it that. I think that's very much taken over as your that's your tune. It's out there. It's around the world now. And I do believe in the power of how that brought about a Labour government after, because it was getting played a lot.
Potentially going to happen anyway, but yeah, it's nice to have people play your tunes. I think it was quite a long time ago the first time someone played one of my tunes back to me in a session and told me it was traditional. It's always quite exciting when you hear it come back from the Chinese whispers slightly different.
Yeah.
There's some of my tunes that are out there that I kind of disagree with how people play them, because I didn't mean them to be played like that, but it's out of your control once they leave you, so you can't really have that.
Yeah, every writer who's had the honour of a tune kind of taking hold and kind of becoming part of the scene will have the exact same feeling. I know, talking to Andy, he's certainly had that. But it's also kind of recognising that, oh, well, that probably means that it is genuinely a folk tune now, because that's what happens. And
yeah,
you will always have your way of playing it. But yeah, I can understand and empathise with your, that's not quite right. You've kind of shaved a corner off there that I put in deliberately, or, whatever the feeling is. I do wonder, actually, I was listening back to Jiggery Pokework the other day, and I thought there's always been a deliberation over, I think it's a C natural or a C sharp at some point. I can't remember if it's that. And I've done a series of tutorials on my Patreon for... I used your tune as an example of how to play faster, because it's been a thing over the years that as I've taught more and more people want to learn that tune, but they struggle to play it fast. And I'm like, well, you've got to learn to play it slowly first, so let's do that. And then throughout the series, they learn to play it at 190 beats per minute if they so wish. That's kind of the fastest I get it to. And then I heard it the other day and I thought, oh dear, have I learned it wrong? Have I taught it wrong? And I started to kind of question myself over this one specific note. I haven't gone back to my version to work out if it's wrong, but I do really try diligently, if I'm teaching other people's tunes, to learn them properly. Do the work, and that's what I teach, is listen to it, go to the source and listen. Learn it their way, but then you have the absolute license to change it, but don't just...
Absolutely. It would be no fun if everyone always played all the tunes the same. And I think what you're doing when you write, well, I don't know what I'm doing when I write tunes. I'm basically, this is how I practice, is exploring new patterns of notes and things like that. So the tunes often come out of those sort of personal practice sessions. It's what you kind of hope will happen when you get a tune that you like the sound of. Your hope is that it's as good as any of the traditional ones that you like. I suppose.
There's a real heartbeat with your music, I find, and the tunes that I mentioned earlier about spending a lot of time in the early days obsessing about your own tunes, and I remember finding a video of you playing Hyena, which is its fake name, the Autumn Hornpipe, and I think it was at Whitney. I think you were on the stage at Whitney, the Super Squeeze as it became, but the Melodeon tuition weekend, and there was a video of you playing this wacky tune, and I was like, okay, I'm obsessed, because this looks really hard. And then it is really hard. I sat down and
I think... It's not as hard as it looks on the Melodeon, though, is it, though?
Well, I don't know.
It fits under the fingers.
It does fit under the fingers.
A lot, because that's how I wrote it. But,
I do love it for that, but I can remember it took me a good while, maybe over a year, to really get it. And even then I still made mess-ups. And I can remember coming to your first solo gig at Cecil Sharp House, and you played it, and I remember you saying, I might not make it through this tune in one piece. And I think maybe you set yourself up to have a wobble or whatever, and you did, but you laughed through it. It was such a wonderful moment for me to see, because there is that expectation that you're going to go and watch, somebody that you've taken great influence from, and you think they're just marvellous, they can do everything right and proper and perfect, and then it's like, oh, actually, no, they're human, and they can still make mistakes even on their own music. And
that's the thing about being a musician, though. Everyone has... you wake up some days and you'll feel like you can do absolutely anything on the instrument, and then you wake up the next day and everything you do is like you're fighting your body. And nobody knows why that happens, but it happens to everyone.
Yeah, it's a really important lesson to learn, isn't it?
The trick is to be able to get through that on your worst days, passably on stage, or so that those solo gigs where you try something that's really exposed like that is a bit dangerous, but it's
kind of a good place to try it though, because you've got nobody else that you're potentially going to mess up. You've just got yourself that's up there.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about teaching, and I hope this is okay. When I approached you to do this podcast, originally I wanted you to do me a Melinar as part of my guest tutor series, and I completely understood when you said that actually no, I don't really want to do that, and you said that you didn't feel comfortable with that. It was kind of an anxious moment to think about teaching, which really surprised me, but I was glad that you told me that, because there was no pressure to do that. But I know that we have taught alongside each other at different events, and I've been to workshops of yours back in the early days of when I started, and I've got a lot out of those, and I know students of mine have really enjoyed your tuition. But where has that come from? Is it always been there, and it's something you've just realised this really isn't for me and I've got other things going on that I don't need to teach now? Or is it sort of something that's grown over the years that you just found that you just don't feel comfortable in those situations anymore?
It's a bit of both. I mean, I've never felt comfortable teaching ever, really, but I always find it bizarre that if you can do something, people think you can teach how to do it, because teaching is a skill in itself. And if I'm going to do something, I want to do it properly. I'm a bit of a perfectionist like that, and so if someone says, I want you to teach something, I want to be able to both prep heavily and work out what on earth it is, because let's say teach how you play this tune, and I don't know. I'm going to have to slow it down and work out how to do that. But and so it takes a lot of prep work to teach to a level that I'm happy at. But also teaching when you have the feedback of the people that you're in front of, I want to make sure that no one's being left behind, because and it's difficult. The bigger the group is, the harder that becomes, and
100%.
You end up sort of going around spending time going to people. But the idea of having to do it into the ether with no feedback, I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, I think people have asked me potentially could I do a tuition book or a tuition video or something like that, and it would be a way of potentially making some money. And who am I to tell people how to play their instrument? Really, when it comes down to it, I can do what Dave Mallinson did for me and get their fingers on the right buttons and say this is how I do it. But
which is it's valid. I mean, I think that's what all of us do, in terms of we only know the way that we've done it. Or if we're able to see what other people are doing and we can deconstruct that, that's a valid skill to do. But
I've seen other people teaching, and I don't think I could do it without being so opinionated to say that this person's doing it wrong. And so it's I love watching other musicians appear with a different way of playing, and think, well, it's a good job they didn't come to my workshop, because I'd have told them not to do that, and then they'd have gone away and not done that. It's very dangerous changing how people play early on, I think, because that individuality, you've got to be careful not to lose any of that bit where the person becomes the music. Because essentially what we've got is on any instrument, but particularly the Melodeon, there are lots of barriers between the music in your head and the sound that comes out, and it's all physical. It's all a physical manifestation of. It's all, you might as well be playing FIFA on the Xbox. If your fingers can do the right thing at the right time, then you can do this amazing thing. And sometimes it will work, and sometimes it won't. But it's just this technical thing. But what for me is the important thing is the musician inside your head that speaks this other language that we have, which is music, and it's universal in the world, and it's a magical thing. So difficult to take that free thing and constrain it here on these things, it's like trying to drive with clutches and accelerators, rather than running. And so I'm just very nervous about telling people what to do.
I think you've explained that really beautifully. It's that sort of it kind of encapsulates your own journey of playing what you do and what your musician journey now. You had this huge background of different varied musical influences, and you found the Melodeon and you found a way of making that work that challenged you, and you enjoyed making the music that you did. But I think you found it through that comprehension of music as a total, perhaps, in my summation of what we've talked about today. But that's been your journey. But there's that feeling of not wanting to impose that on other people, but inspiring them. And I think just through what you've said there, inspiring people to find their way of taking all of that sort of mental musicianship and making it work, either on the Melodeon or something else, if that's not going to be your instrument. But I think that is really important.
I think ultimately, just to add another thing to this, I love playing with people, with people in sessions, or just in a way that you can play alongside people and get something from anyone you play with. I was going to say something. I don't know how to put it, but that's what I was going to say. That learning is. It doesn't matter what you do in front of the person if it's in a workshop teaching. If they're not going to go away and practice that and want to practice that, that's where it all happens. If they really want to do it, they can find out what I'm saying without me having to say it.
Yeah.
By watching what I do. You can slow down music and hear exactly what people are doing. With adult learners especially, they're grown-ups. Think if they really want to play the Melodeon, they should sort of explore it themselves as well as have guidance.
I find that often with adults, that confidence of being a kid, and that they lose the inner child, that sense of exploration, that sense of not being scared to make mistakes and kind of working things out for themselves. I find that this generally over the years that I've taught, there has been this need for sheet music, this request for sheet music, this request for, can I have it in advance? I want to know what you're going to do.
I won't do that. I don't think that's the right way to play the instrument. And it's tricky because...
But I can tell where it comes from, but I agree with you, I don't do it either, yeah.
Because as soon as you're dealing with sheet music, you're stifling that inner musician that has the music in their head. The person that can remember how a tune goes is... it's a natural thing, and you're thinking what's happening next before it comes out. But if you're reading sheet music, you're just putting a program into a machine, and the fingers come out the other side, and you're bypassing that musical brain. And it's very difficult to get it into that musical brain while you're still doing that. I know people that can do it, but it doesn't come very naturally to them. Even some of the best musicians in Bellowhead will read the scores, play them immaculately, and then you go, well, you've played it now, so you don't need the music. They go, oh, no, I wasn't learning it. And you go, well, how were you expressing it properly then? You weren't learning it. It's like you have to feel it, surely, for it to come out. And it's, our instrument's difficult to be feely on, isn't it? Because it's so mechanical, but we're not like a fiddle that can slide up to a note and things like that.
Yeah,
So
I think it comes later, doesn't it? Because there's a lot of feeling you can get out of it, I find, but you have to get the mechanics of it in there first. And that, in a situation, I'm thinking of Fisherman's, when I had to learn things pretty damn quick in rehearsals, and it's like, I'm not going to be able to learn it as quick as you, and I'm sorry about that. I'm going to need to walk away and just have a moment to work out what row, what direction, what key I'm going to press. But as soon as that's there, it's like, right, now I can come back and do that extra work. And in my Melodeon mind, I did that very quickly. But to outsiders who might not understand the instrument, they'd be like, what the hell?
It's great when you tell people, no, I can't do that. The instrument won't do that. I can't play that note and that note at the same time.
I was actually very lucky that I had a few moments like that, but because Hazel Askew had been there before me, she'd already kind of, the musical director had already been primed on Melodeons and the weirdness of Melodeons, but he was very excited to work with me, or Hazel particularly, but when I got to work with him, because he was like, well, what can you do? And there was that really lovely interaction of, I wasn't being told what to do, I was being offered a chance to tweak what he had scored,
and that's what you have to do on the Melodeon all the time.
100%.
The more non-folky the music you play, the more you have to do that.
Well, I've got this note in this octave. Is that okay? It's like
I can play it in this way round. Yeah,
I've got the F natural down the octave, so there'll be this random blip at some point. But actually, I mean, that's what I love about my own personal learning journey, which I'm going to take a moment, John, to fangirl you once again, but because I spent so long listening to tunes, basically, the Spiers and Bowden Tunes album has been on my playlist forever, but particularly in my sort of younger 20s. And I just spent so much time rewinding, listening specifically to left-hand bits, right-hand twiddles, even in what Jon was doing on the fiddle, you know, and kind of seeing how he was responding to something you were doing. I was really listening out for that. But for me, there is this real beauty in what you've just said about people can learn from me if they listen, watch, slow down. That was my journey, you know, that was my journey into the instrument. I can read music, and I have taught myself retrospectively to read it on the Melodeon, but it's not the way that I prefer to get into it, because I think if you can hear something first, you have more information in how you want it to come out, and
well,
you know,
and we need that information.
Yeah.
So we need to know in advance what chord we're going to be playing
100%.
with what note. Otherwise, you can't plan for your next bit of fingering or bellows control. So, it's and to make that instinctive is sort of the pinnacle of Melodeon playing. I reckon once you've learned how to change a chord to one that's in a different direction, and keep playing the tune fluidly and change the fingering on the right hand without having planned it before. Once you can do that, there's nothing more I can teach you. It's taken me ages to get here. And
I think that's, for me as a teacher, that is always my end goal. I don't really have like end goals with students, but if they come to me with a certain aspiration, I've got a general idea of the direction I want to take them in. But it's always around getting off the sheet music if they're on the sheet music, or using it in a lesser capacity, and actually exploring the instrument, getting across the rows, working out, you know, what you've got on the push, what you've got on the pull, and making these changes in the moment. Because then if your brain can do that, that's a huge barrier just obliterated, and there's the music. You can go forward down that road and make your creations come to life, basically. And it does take a long time, and I'm lucky to have students that have been with me for 8, 9, 10 years or more, and they, depending on the amount of time that they've put into it, it's taken them quite a long time to get to that stage, but it's glorious that they're there now, and you can really see the confidence in everything that they're achieving and the groups they're playing in, etc., etc. And I think that if you don't have the contact time with the people that you have taught, you will be teaching people like myself who just listens to you, watches you. So know that you have, I'm sure you do, but, you know, influenced a generation of players because of how you play and how you've filtered what you've enjoyed from other players and, you know, made it your own. And that's really special, I think. It's a really key thing in my Melodeon life that you were there at that particular moment.
I remember that being back there at the beginning, desperate for Melodeon players to listen to. You know, I had
quite
the unfathomable John Kirkpatrick ones where I couldn't work out whether he was playing a Melodeon like mine or not.
And now you've probably got several like him, have you not? With all of your Stradella
not
basses
exactly,
and things.
But yeah, I've got lots of different systems that I have to switch between to play the different things I do. But yes, my wall of box over there.
I think for people that don't know Jon's wall of instruments, there are various. I mean, you did your session lockdowns, your lockdown sessions, didn't you, on YouTube? And they're still available to watch back, aren't they? Did you do a series where you were introducing and talking about various different boxes? So is that on YouTube?
Yeah, I did. It was for Christmas, actually. It was the Squeezebox Advent Calendar. And I took out a box, a different one every day, and took it to bits and then played a tune on it and showed everyone the thing that made it different to all the other ones. It was very, very nerdy.
I was going to say, if you want to get your Melodeon geek on, I will leave a link to Jon's YouTube channel down below, and then you'll be able to find that on there. Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat, as I knew I would. I was a little bit apprehensive just because I've never had that much time to talk to you. You've always been so busy at various events, but
I'm famously unavailable.
Yeah. What's coming up for you in 2025? Do you know yet?
Yeah, I've got tours. So we'll be out with Spiers and Bowden in February and March again. Then later on in the spring, I should be out again with the Gigspanner Big Band, launching the album that we will have recorded. I need to get my plants in May. And then I was
going to say, we've not talked about the allotment at all, but that is a massive part of your life when you're not on tour.
It's less of my life when I'm on tour as much as I have been. It has to look after itself. There are other irons in the fire that's closely related to the Saltlines project we did, potentially another project of that sort.
Excellent.
Upcoming, but we're just working on the details of what that will be.
That's very exciting. Again, wanted to see that. Like, I've listened to the books last year while I was driving in France, and totally fell in love with the story. And if nobody has read the Salt Path books, they are true life, real life stories, and they are quite breathtaking, to be perfectly honest. I would really like to get to see that project, so I'm glad to hear that there might be something happening next year. That's really exciting. We've chatted for nearly 2 hours, but that was what I was secretly hoping would happen. I've now got a massive job editing this into some format, but I am very happy that it's happened, and hopefully get to see you out on tour somewhere. Cool. Get your tickets now, guys. Thank you so much, Jon.
Yeah, good luck with the editing.
I think I just about managed to contain my fangirling. I hope that kind of didn't come across too but if it did, it just goes to show just how much it means to have sat down with my original Melodeon hero and just spent so much time in his company, and he was so generous with his time, so thank you so much, Jon. This month, January 2025, we're kickstarting a new guest tutor series over on my Patreon and on the podcast. I cannot wait. It's going to be a stellar year, just like the first year was. So if you want to be part of it with the guest tutors teaching us, as well as being able to hear everything that they're talking to me about, you want to be a member of my Patreon. So please check out. There's loads of different membership tiers available, different price points. You can stay for as long as you want. You can come and go. People sort of do whatever they want to do. You want to be there. You want to be part of it. It's going to be absolutely amazing, and yeah, I just cannot wait. Kicking off season 2 of my guest tutor series is the fantastic, brilliant Cohen Braithwaite Kilcoyne. I know that some of you are going to be really excited to hear that. He's coming on my Patreon on Zoom live. If you want to be part of the live, you're going to have to be part of my Patreon on Wednesday the 22nd of January. That's going to be 7 p.m. UK time for the live. It's going to be recorded and you'll be able to get that as part of the membership. He's doing a Menelaar tutorial all about Caribbean music and the influence it has had on English folk and vice versa. If you're not familiar, he's just released an album of his own that explores this, and he is a phenomenally talented and very articulate, intelligent musician, and I'm really excited to see his approach to teaching my Patreon crowd as well. There's a link downstairs to send you over to my Patreon so you can read more about that and sign up there. Just a couple of things for me to plug this month. Coming up in January, the 19th of January, I'm going to be teaching a level 1, an absolute beginner's Melodeon course at the Stables in Milton Keynes. This is a regular thing that I have set up with them, and every few months I go there and there's a whole crowd of people. There's loan instruments available, so you don't even have to have your own instrument. DG Melodeon, if it's ever something that you've wanted to take up, there's your chance. Come and meet me, and we'll have 10 till 3 to explore and get you kick-started into the world of squeezeboxing. And then if you've done the course before, or if you are at an improver level, if you've had the instrument for a little while, I am doing a level 2 course on Saturday the 1st of March, which is 10 till 3 as well. Check out the details below. I'll leave a link to the Stables website and you can sign up with them directly. That's everything from me this month. Thank you so much for listening, and I really hope that you had a wonderful Christmas and New Year. Keep listening, because I have got all sorts of amazing guests lined up for Series 2, but do check out the back catalogue on Patreon and wherever you listen to podcasts for any guests you've missed from Series 1. Take very good care, and I'll see you again next month. Cheers, guys. Bye.